And after he had been in the service of the king 3 days, as he was with the Lamanitish servants going forth with their flocks to the place of water, which was also called the waters of Sebus, and all the Lamanites drive their flocks hither that they may have water. Therefore, as Ammon and the servants of the king were driving forth their flocks to this place of water, behold, a certain number of the Lamanites, who had been with their flocks to water, stood and scattered the flocks of Ammon and the service of the king, and they scattered them insomuch that they fled many ways. Now the servants of the king began to murmur, saying, Now the king will slay us, as he has our brethren, because their flocks were scattered by the wickedness of those men. And they began to weep exceedingly, saying, Behold, our flocks are scattered already. Now they wept because of the fear of being slain. Now when Ammon saw this in his heart, he was swollen within him for joy, for, said he, I will show forth my power unto these my fellow servants, or the power which is in me, in restoring these flocks unto the king, that I may win the hearts of these my fellow servants, that I may lead them to believe in my words. And now these were the thoughts of Ammon, when he saw the afflictions of those whom he termed to be his brethren. And it came to pass that he flattered them by his words, saying, My brethren, be of good cheer, and let us go in search of the flocks, and we will gather them together, and bring them back unto the place of water. And thus we will preserve the flocks unto the king, and he will not slay us. And it came to pass that they went in search of the flocks, and they did follow Ammon, and they rushed forth with much swiftness, and did head the flocks of the king, and did gather them together again to the place of water. And those men stood to scatter their flocks. But Ammon said unto his brethren, Encircle the flocks round about, that they flee not. And I go and contend with these men, who do scatter our flocks. Therefore they did as Ammon commanded them. And he went forth, and stood to contend with those who stood by the waters of Sebus, and they were in number not a few. Therefore they did not fear Ammon, for they supposed that none of the men could slay him according to their pleasure, for they knew not that the Lord had promised Mosiah that he would deliver his sons out of their hands. Neither did they know anything concerning the Lord. Therefore they delighted in the destruction of their brethren, and for this cause they stood to scatter the flocks of the king. But Ammon stood forth and began to cast stones at them with his sling, yea, with mighty power he did sling stones among them. And thus he slew a certain number of them, insomuch that they began to be astonished at his power. Nevertheless they were angry because of the slain of their brethren, and they were determined that he should fall. Therefore, seeing that they could not hit him with their stones, they came forth with clubs to slay him. But behold, every man that lifted his club to smite Ammon, he smote off their arms with the sword. For he withstand their blows by smiting their arms at the edge of his sword, insomuch that they began to be astonished, and began to flee before him, yea, and they were not few in number, and he caused them to flee by the strength of his arm. Now 6 of them had fallen by the sling, but he slew none save it were their leader with the sword, and he smote off as many of their arms as were lifted up against him, and they were not a few. And when he had driven them afar off, he returned, and they watered their flocks, and returned them to the pasture of the king. And then went in unto the king, bearing the arms which had been smitten off by the sword of Ammon, of those who sought to slay him. And they were carried in unto the king for a testimony of the things which they had done. Chapter 18. King Lamoni supposes that Ammon is the Great Spirit. Ammon teaches the king about the creation, God's dealings with men, the redemption that comes through Christ. Lamoni believes and falls to the earth as if dead. About 90 BC. And it came to pass that King Lamoni caused that a servant should stand forth and testify to all the things which they had seen concerning the matter. And when they had all testified to the things which they had seen, and he had learned of the faithfulness of Ammon in preserving his flocks, and also his great power in contending against those who sought to slay him, he was astonished exceedingly, and said, Surely this is more than a man. Behold, is not this the Great Spirit who doth send such great punishments upon this people because of their murders? And they answered the king and said, Whether he be the Great Spirit or a man, we know not, but this much we do know, that he cannot be slain by the enemies of the king, neither can they scatter the king's flocks when he is with us, because of his expertness and great strength. Therefore we know that he is a friend to the king. And now, king, we do not believe that a man has such great power, for we know he cannot be slain. Now when the king heard these words, he said unto them, Now I know that it is the Great Spirit, and he has come down at this time to preserve your lives, that I might not slay you as I did your brethren. Now this is the Great Spirit, of whom our fathers have spoken. Now this was the tradition of Lamoni, which he had received from his father, that there was a Great Spirit. Notwithstanding they believed in a Great Spirit, they supposed that whatsoever they did was right. Nevertheless Lamoni began to fear exceedingly. with fear lest he had done wrong in slaying his servants. For he had slain many of them because their brethren had scattered their flocks at the place of water, and thus, because they had slain their flocks, because they had had their flocks scattered, they were slain. Now it was the practice of these Lamanites to stand by the waters of Sebus to scatter the flocks of the people, that thereby they might drive away many that were scattered into their own land, it being a practice of plunder among them. And it came to pass that King Lamoni inquired of his servants, saying, Where is this man that has such great power? And they said unto him, Behold, he is feeding thy horses. Now the king commanded his servants previous to the time of the watering of their flocks, that they should prepare his horses and chariots, and conduct him forth to the land of Nephi. For there had been a great feast appointed at the land of Nephi, by the father of Lamoni, who was king over all the land. Now when King Lamoni heard that Ammon was preparing his horses and his chariots, he was more astonished because of the faithfulness of Ammon, saying, Surely there has not been any servant among all my servants that has been so faithful as this man. For even he doth remember all my commandments to execute them. Now I surely know that this is the great spirit, and I would desire him that he would come in unto me, but I durst not. And it came to pass that when Ammon had made ready the horses and the chariots for the king and his servants, he went in unto the king, and he saw that the countenance of the king was changed. Therefore he was about to return out of his presence. And one of the king's servants said unto him, Rabbana, which is, being interpreted, powerful, a great king, considering their kings to be powerful. And thus he said unto him, Rabbana, the king desireth thee to stay. Therefore Ammon turned himself unto the king, and said unto him, What wilt thou that I should do for thee, O king? And the king answered him not for the space of an hour, according to their time, for he knew not what he should say unto him. And it came to pass that Ammon said unto him again, What desirest thou of me? But the king answered him not. And it came to pass that Ammon, being filled with the Spirit of God, therefore he perceived the thoughts of the king, and he said unto him, Is it because thou hast heard that I defended thy servants and thy flocks, and slew 7 of their brethren with the sling and with the sword, and smote off the arms of others in order to defend thy flocks and thy servants? Because, behold, is this that causeth thy marveling? I say unto you, what is it that thy marvelings are so great? Behold, I am a man, and I am thy servant. Therefore whatsoever thou desirest which is right, I will do. Now when the king heard these words, he marveled again, for beheld that Ammon could discern his thoughts. But notwithstanding this, King Lamoni did open his mouth, and said unto him, Who art thou? Art thou that great spirit who knoweth all things? Ammon answered and said unto him, I am not. And the king said, How knowest thou the thoughts of my heart? Thou mayest speak boldly, and tell me concerning these things, and also tell me by what power ye slew and smote off the arms of my brethren that scattered my flocks. And now, if thou wilt tell me concerning these things, whatsoever thou desirest I will give unto thee. And if it were needed, I would guard thee with my armies, but I know that thou art more powerful than all they. Therefore, nevertheless, whatsoever thou desirest of me, I will grant it unto thee. Now Ammon, being wise, yet harmless, he said unto Lamoni, Wilt thou hearken unto my words, if I tell thee by what power I do these things? And this is the thing that I desire of thee. And the king answered him and said, Yea, I will believe all thy words. And thus he was caught with guile. And Ammon began to speak unto him with boldness, and said unto him, Believest thou that there is a God? And he answered and said unto him, I do not know what that meaneth. And Ammon said, Believest thou that there is a great spirit? And he said, Yea. Ammon said, This is God. And Ammon said unto him again, Believest thou that this great spirit, who is God, created all things which are in heaven and in the earth? And he said, Yea, I believe that he created all things which are in the earth, but I do not know the heavens. And Ammon said unto him, The heavens is a place where God dwells and all his holy angels. And King Lamoni said, Is it above the earth? And Ammon said, Yea, and he looketh down upon all the children of men, and he knows all the thoughts and intents of the heart. For by his hand were they all created from the beginning. And King Lamoni said, I believe all things, these things which thou hast spoken. Thou art sent from God? Ammon said unto him, I am a man, and a man in the beginning was created after the image of God. And I am called by his Holy Spirit to teach these things unto this people, that they may be brought to a knowledge of that which is just and true. And a portion of that Spirit dwelleth in me, which giveth me knowledge, and also power according to my faith and desires which are in God. Now when Ammon had said these words, he began at the creation of the world, and also all the creation of Adam, and told him all the things concerning the fall of man, and rehearsed and laid before him the records in the holy scriptures of the people, which have been spoken by the prophets, even down to the time that their father Lehi left Jerusalem. And he also rehearsed unto them, for it was unto the king and his servants, all the journeyings of their fathers in the wilderness, and all their sufferings with hunger and thirst, and their travail, and so forth. And he also rehearsed unto them concerning the rebellions of Laman and Lemuel, and the sons of Ishmael, yea, all their rebellions did he relate unto them. And he did expound unto them all the records in the scriptures from the time that Lehi left Jerusalem down to the present time.